in the process of it setting up. Cool. All right, it should be there. I'm just going to share screen now.
Okay, let me just edit a couple of things. I'm gonna delete the video.
I already did that.
You deleted the video? Good.
Live stream, yeah.
And then where's the, I'll just type my name, I guess. Okay, I have it. Share, copy, and then I can just put it. Link. Okay, let's start the podcast.
Yeah. All right, ready?
Yep, let's go.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Art of Move podcast with myself, Anthony Emmanuel, my good friend, Dr. William Raybar. We're still out here in the Canadian Rockies trying to find the grand unified theory of human movement and biomechanics, and we are joined today by a guest that I have wanted to have here for a long time since we started this. We have Naudi Aguilar, the founder of Functional Patterns in the fitness industry for over 15 years, coming up with innovative ways to address dysfunctions within the body. And honestly, Naudi doesn't need any introductions. Naudi, you've been the White Whale podcast guest from the beginning for me. So I'm really, really stoked to have you on for this conversation. For people who are just joining, this is a follow-up episode to one of our earlier episodes. We had episode 14 was an in-depth look at the limitations of science in terms of how it's used to address solving biomechanical problems and the problems with basically just drawing conclusions about how
Can you put it full screen?
Works based on throwing around the conclusions and the results that you see in papers. And we did a very, very large kind of in-depth look at the issues with some of the philosophies of science, the limitations of science, how people kind of fall into this mindset of scientism, where they think that the only way to draw conclusions or gather information from the natural world is to draw it from the natural sciences. We talked about some of the biases that come within academic institutions and the limitations of the paradigms that they form. And we're going to go even more in depth because this is a conversation, we had it months and months and months ago. Like I said, that was episode 14, and I think this is episode 67 that we're on now. So over 50 episodes almost later, we're still having the same discussions. And this was really pertinent. We wanted to have Naudi on because this has been kind of a back and forth between, quote, research-based physios discrediting some of the results that Functional Patterns is getting en masse with the multiple clients that they had. So first of all, Naudi, thanks for joining us for this conversation. Will, I know you want to tee us off for a little bit, but just in general, man, like so much respect for you and the work that you do. Really, really stoked to have you here and really, really pumped for this conversation.
I appreciate you guys having me. I saw that was sent it over to me and I listened to it, and I thought it was fantastic. The way that you and Will got after it was spectacular. And from what I'm hearing, it seems like Will was digging even deeper into the research and whatnot. So I'm really looking forward into what he's found, what he's looking at, because from a very long time ago, I guess I'll maybe get into a little bit into the history of it. Back in like 2010, 2011, do you guys remember seeing that post on SureDog.com?
I looked at it. That? Yeah. I was on SureDog daily, so
yeah, I got fucking reamed really bad, and I didn't have anybody defending me on my position at all. And prior to that, I'd seen a strength and conditioning video of a guy named Sean Shirk. He was a UFC fighter from way back in the day, and I was like, I saw how he trained, and I'm like, okay, I get it. It's like you train in relation to different demands that you're going to face in the environment. I'm like, I see what's going on. I had already been doing it, so I was like, okay, I'm going to put this up on YouTube, and then I'm going to post this up on SureDog and say, hey, guys, check out the fighter that I'm working with. He's an amateur still, but we're hoping to, build up and do some good things with this training that I'm employing. I came in completely naive to how the industry even operated at that point. I mean, I had done little bits of research here and there, but I thought like the progressives were like the normal of our industry. You know, like when you hear of a Paul Check or something like that, he was kind of like normal. I knew he had done things to some extent that weren't necessarily like that weren't necessarily the most practical, like doing deadlifts and back squats and whatnot. But I knew he was still progressive, and I thought that was the norm. Well, lo and behold, I put up this post, and then I get torn apart, and everybody, I'm just like, whoa, what the hell is going on? Why am I getting annihilated like this? I then end up after that point, I was so shocked by it. I was completely surprised. I was like, let me start doing some research. Let me look into some of the studies that are out there on what people are concluding, how people think about it. And quite literally, I was like, this industry is still completely in the Stone Ages. Like they're incapable of actually observing phenomenon and making adjustments in relation to that phenomenon. And for me, growing up, that's all I knew. My parents were orchardists. They were migrant workers from Mexico. They came into this country. Eventually, by the time I was about
Pause. How much do you want to bet that when he says I did some research and some studies, that doesn't actually involve reading studies?
Yeah, it's usually like people going to like news outlets and looking at the first study.
Yeah.
That they find. It's not actually going to PubMed.
Yeah, or he actually just went on blogs and asked what people were doing. Yeah. Okay. That's all I wanted to say. I'm pretty curious. All right, keep going.
Yeah.
Like 5 or 6 years old, they started buying their own land and cultivating the land. Cherries were the fruits that they cultivated, and I got.
Are you kidding? No. Pause. Are you kidding me? His parents were cherry pickers? Are you fucking kidding me? Jesus fucking Christ.
Oh, that's perfect.
Oh my God.
Oh,
that's incredible. God. That's incredible. Okay, keep going. Keep going. That's so fitting. Okay, keep going.
Problems that they dealt with as it related to trying to create a yield out of their farms. And I saw all the problems that came with it. So all I ever saw, whether it was dealing with irrigation systems, whether it was dealing with their rental properties, whether it was dealing with the different businesses that they had, all I saw was the practical application of solving problems. I never saw scientific studies. I just saw people solving problems right in front of me, whether it was electrical work, whether it was installing tile, whether that was working on plumbing issues, whether that was working on structural issues, structural damage in a building. That's all I saw growing up. That's all I saw. And so when I started researching the ways that people were arriving at conclusions, and at that time, everything was deadlifts and back squats. To even say anything at that time against the deadlifts and back squat was heresy. To say that at that time was like you were going to get torn apart, and that's what exactly happened. Because I think I was probably the only person at that time that said anything about those types of lifts, the only person that actually questioned them, and I get no credit for it because nowadays people aren't doing those lifts anywhere near to the degree that they were back in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, all the way to about like 2014 and 15. And I was shocked. It was like I wasn't expecting that. Fast forward to today, and things have changed. Things have changed greatly. I've seen that there's actual progress in the industry. People are valuing anecdotes, right? They are valuing them because they do matter, and that it is a form of evidence. You know, Galileo, he had anecdotes, and lo and behold, you know, it's like he's etched in scientific history as a pioneer. And so on my end, I guess I feel like I have kind of like we have an independent body of research in functional patterns that could be classified almost like a scientific institute with what we do. Yes, it's a business, but we are a collection. We are getting repeatability all across the world, utilizing the methods that I've culminated over my career and whatnot.
Okay, pause.
Yeah, where's his control group?
Yeah. First of all, I've read, the biography of Galileo, and like one of the main things about him is that he literally went to prison for being a firm believer in the scientific method when it didn't even exist. Everyone was like religious and believing in Aristotle, whose methods predated the scientific method. By the way, Aristotle was like one of the very smart guy, but his approach put science back like thousands of years, because we knew that the earth wasn't the center of the universe, but he thought it wasn't, or whatever. His theories were compatible with Christianity. So heliocentrism took a way longer to come about because people chose Aristotle. And then Galileo was going against it because he was using, like, literally what we do in physics, right? He was using experiments and repeated measures in physics and like very hard sciences when that wasn't a thing. And this guy says he had like anecdotes. Like, okay. But then he measured them, right? It's like saying for like Newton wasn't using science.
I think it's important to clarify that, we appreciate anecdotes, but if there is a better form of research available, we're going to use the best form of research available. And in the case of back squats and deadlifts, there is a lot of research available, and there's longitudinal evidence suggesting that these things don't lead to higher injury rates. So we're going to go with the better form of evidence here. And if you want to study, it could be EOS et al. 2017. It should be a systematic review. But that's a really important point to clarify. We're not like pure. Our philosophy isn't scientism.
Yeah.
Right? If the science isn't available, then we'll go to anecdote. But if it is available, we're going to use it.
Yeah. I mean, we use them all the time in the clinic.
Yeah.
What the fuck? Like, I used to coach soccer. You think I was looking at scientific studies to do? No. All right. Whatever. All right, keep going.
Very interesting experience being in this industry. And I think we're getting to the tail end of, I feel that right at the beginning of when I got started was when people first had real access to the internet. And what's happened now is that people have become exposed to societal corruption, because that's one thing that I've gotten into in my entire career is that, corruption does exist. Anytime that you deal with people at an individual basis, it's going to be different than if you deal with them at a collective basis. And so therefore, if when you get people in groups, that's where you get mob rule. And that is a similar condition that happens in science. I saw it a long time ago. I anticipated that, and I said, you know what? Scientists are humans. They are apt to engage in corrupt behavior if you put them in certain circumstances. And if you look at the history of science, it's been that over and over and over again. Anytime you've had any radical revolutionary challenge them on their positions, there comes a point of being skeptical, but then there also comes a point where you're being tyrannical, and that's what I feel that science has kind of been. They're too skeptical, and it's problematic.
All right, wait. Pause. There hasn't been like a single time in history where scientists have been the leader of society. Literally, the story of scientists is they're getting ignored by people who don't listen to science, like Naudi. That figure, like how long does it take to translate knowledge into practice? The answer is 17 years. It's like a very seminal paper. And if you're correcting misinformation, the average is like 42 years. It's scientists aren't out there telling us what to do. They're out there getting ignored and being fucking nerds in labs, right? If you've ever been in a lab, which Naudi probably hasn't been, being a scientist is like the least sexy job. When you see the conference, it's almost like a lawyer. People think that lawyers are always in court. Unless you're a public defendant or you work in criminal law, it's very, very small part of your job, right? Most of it is being in a crummy lab with shitty like equipment. I mean, better equipment than most, but.
And then we're also not saying science is perfect either. Like it has its flaws. We've covered those too.
Yeah.
On posts, it's just that it's better.
Yeah. I'd even say that the majority of our page is shitting on science and people use it poorly. It's just, again, it's the best thing. It's kind of like capitalism. It's just the best system what we have right now. I mean, I wouldn't say that about politics because I don't want to say what my political affiliations are, but
it's the best we have available. And then when
democracy is, I'd say democracy is. That's a better point, I'd say.
Okay. Yeah, but when someone shows us a better way of gathering knowledge, then we'll use that.
Yeah. That's the thing. What's funny is that all these, I think, people are very emotionally invested, but I don't know about you, but like I flip-flop around ideas a lot. If better science comes out, it's just, for me, it's a way to predict what's going to happen in the future. And we didn't go on the moon with anecdotes. We calculated it and then we did our best guess, and some of it we fucked up, like Apollo 13 didn't go super well. What is it, the Challenger mission? But if we had used anecdote, we probably would have never been on the moon. You know what I mean? All right, keep going.
Intro. Yeah.
you know what, like the fact that we have to even go to that level and say that science has been corrupt in the past or could be corrupted. Different countries have their scientists, government scientists in certain countries, right? There's been times in the history, even within Western society, where groups of scientists were cooperating on things that weren't so looked upon nicely right now. Let's put it that way, right? So
that's true. Yeah.
There is fallibility in the industry. There's no doubt about it, right? So let's find out where it is fallible and where we can simplify it to see and to teach the regular person kind of how to look at this. Okay, so I have a Sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to interject.
Pause. Can we pause first, actually?
Yeah.
So I think what he's talking about is an example would be the physiognomy. What do you call it? Like predicting, like criminals by the way people look, or like using eugenism. I don't know how you pronounce that, but like basically finding ways in how white people were superior. And I'm using quote marks right now because we're not, but you know what I mean? Like using science to prove that white people are better. Yeah. That's one of the ways where science was misguided, but I'd say that's more a symptom because society was extremely racist back then. Sure. It wasn't that science was flawed. If anything, I'd say we probably discovered reasons why that was wrong. Like good scientists were like, oh yeah, actually the data's not there. And that's one of the reasons why I think racism decreased. Like when we noticed that the difference in IQ scores between black and white people were because like of many reasons. Like if you normalize for, income at birth, it's pretty much the same. And if you account for social, like cultural differences in the words used in the IQ test, again, it's the same. We discovered that because of science, because before everyone used to think that, all the white people in America used to think that black people were idiots, right? Which they never were. But again, science kind of gave weight to that, but it was just confirming ideas. So yeah, science is swayed by culture, but probably less than society itself, right? You know what I mean? Yeah, keep going.
Right now, what we're going to end up doing is addressing the biopsychosocial model, right? And I want to say I have already been incorporating the biopsychosocial model. Out of the people that actually responded to these controversial physios posts, who sent me DMs in somewhat good faith. The thing is, many of them came in bad faith, and I had to kind of convert them. I've had tens of thousands of engagements with people on social media. I'm sure you guys have seen, even from way back in the day, how many people I would battle with on a minute-to-minute basis, and that would be all day long that I would be doing it. So I've had tens of thousands of engagements that have enabled me to practice to pull somebody into a good faith discussion. And when I draw them into a good faith discussion and I ask them, what is the biopsychosocial model in practice? They begin to explain the steps. And I'm like, I've been doing that since about 2009. I've already been doing it for a very long time. I've been applying it. I've understood when I started reading documents on the stress response, when I started getting into Robert Sapolsky's work really deeply, like at around 2010, I was like, oh, okay. So you're talking about the stress response to some degree or the other, and you're down regulating it to some degree, so a person is not intimidated by the movement. I get what you're getting at. I've been doing it for a while, so I don't understand where the disagreement is. I guess I agree with the biopsychosocial model. I think it's a part of the equation, but to completely abandon the biomechanical notion and say that pain is not biomechanically oriented, when literally every single thought that's in our brain, it has some kind of a physical manifestation attached to it. Where we look at body language, for example, like our brain, what we're thinking and processing shows up on our body language. It's impossible to not show it on your body language. And it happens very deep. I think some even body language experts don't really see body language to the depth that you can see it. So when I look at body language, I see it from a much deeper place. There's CIA agents don't just read basic body language cues. They see small millimetric micro expressions that people institute whenever they're lying or whenever they're trying. Whenever they're uncomfortable, they look for those cues. And so the thing is, the brain and the body correspond to one another. So to say that the brain, and never mind that when a person stops worrying, that changes your biomechanics. That changes your movement. When you're relaxed, your mechanics are different than when you're anxious. So I've known about this for a long time intuitively, and I practiced it. So when I say, I'm like, oh, this is all you're doing, I'm like, yeah, I've been doing this forever, bro. Like, this is not, what you're talking about is nothing new to me from a practical standpoint. It's like, duh. It's like, this is basic behavior, the basic application of behaviorism as it relates to helping somebody rehabilitate their pain. So with that in mind, I don't want to take a big dump on science because I value science, even peer review. If I want to say, okay, what are the hormones that are typically associated to anxiety? What are the hormones that are typically associated to depression? I just punch that in on Google, and then I take what they're saying, and I trust the information that's there because peer review is telling me that, hey, yes, anxiety is triggered.
So before this gets too like convoluted with a bunch of other ideas, can we go back to the biopsychosocial model for a second?
Yeah, first of all, I want to address the good faith discussion thing. Because how did you get blocked by Naudi? Do you remember?
I made a meme.
Oh, you made a meme. Do you know how I got blocked?
I think we can't remember.
I got blocked on my personal account. So he said the physio was a welfare job. And I said, it's literally not a welfare job. Like the government doesn't pay for it. So by definition, it is not welfare. And he told me I was a pussy and I was afraid of functional patterns taking my job away. And then he blocked me. What a good faith discussion. And I was I was no one back then. I was just, well, I'm still no one, but I didn't have a physio account or anything. It was just literally just a personal account. And I've seen chats he's had with women when he had his controversial takes. And I see what he's trying to do. Like it's all like asking question and being inquisitive, which is something I use, right? But the way he does it is so transparent and like bad. It's basically like, oh, look at me, I'm gonna gaslight that woman. Like show her how she's a degenerate, which is incredible. I think it's encapsulate how he's not as smart as he thinks he is. I think he's probably smart. I mean, he managed to make a lot of money, but more as like a marketer and gatherer of people who gravitate toward that sort of stuff. But I don't think he's nearly as smart or knowledgeable as he thinks he is.
Sure. I think the other thing about the biopsychosocial model is that he's saying that we ignore biomechanics.
Yeah.
This is like a really classic straw man.
Yeah.
That happens a lot. Not just with Naudi, but with a lot of other people that they think that the modern implementation of the biopsychosocial model is people just saying pain is all in your head. It's just psychosocial factors. That's just not what we think at all. I can't speak for everybody, but at least us two, and then physios we associate with.
Yeah, I mean, there was a swing. It went too far at some point where it was like the part where people were like explaining pain is in your head. That went too far, but I don't think that's what we are.
Yeah.
I also like, and he does that in other videos as well, where he brings back everything to how it influences the biomechanics. Right. So the psychosocial model is more of a Venn diagram now, the way you see it. Right. So there's an overlap. The way he sees it is there's biomechanics, and then on top there's like the psycho and the social, and it's arrows, and the reason they matter is how they influence biomechanics,
right?
Which makes no sense in my opinion, right? Because like you can have pain without any damage. I've had people with completely clean MRIs having horrible pain. I've had people with like double massive rotator cuff tears, like complete ones, doing handstand push-ups, and like I couldn't even reproduce pain in the clinic. I was like, yeah, you're good, bro. You can just go home.
But one day in 20 years.
That's the fucking argument. Yeah. The point is, it's that they interact. It's not that they influence biomechanics in a way that's going to cause pain, because it's not A equals B. And there's good experiments on that. There's the rubber hand experiment where people, you kind of trick them with visual feedback that their hand is the other hand, right? Using a mirror. So they think that the right hand is actually their hand, but it's actually rubber. And then you hit them with the hammer, and they always report that they have pain, but obviously there's no damage, right? It's literally their brain that produced it. Where's the biomechanical point in that, right? Anyways. So again, it's just misunderstanding.
Cortisol, and I'm like, okay, thank you. I appreciate that information is there. If I ask, hey, what area of the brain controls involuntary movement, and then it says that the R complex is what is going to trigger involuntary movement, then I'll be like, oh, it says that, I trust that. If I go on Google and I say, okay, what triggers voluntary movement? And then if it says, it would say, what would it be? The cerebral motor cortex. I believe that's the area that would be getting triggered if you do a voluntary motion. Then I'll go to Google and I will trust that information. So I trust science every single day. It's just there's a difference between hard science and soft science, good science and fucking junk science. And these people are trying to treat the junk science like if it's hard science, and it's not hard science. It's not. It's really not. It's like there's no repeatability in what they're doing. So yeah, so I don't mean to interject too much, but keep going, Will.
No, that's a really important point too, because as we're exploring the limitations of science as it pertains to movement and biomechanics, we're not shitting on science. We're not shitting on the scientific method. What we're doing, and we talked about this in episode 14, we're making a distinction between the scientific method as a method to collect more information to basically come to stronger conclusions from the science, as in like scientific consensus, academia, and a mental model where you can basically take the word of basically a paper out of context without looking deeper into it, and outsourcing your own thinking to the conclusions of papers that professionals are just throwing around. And that's the big difference.
We're actually going to have Musiolo's going to be putting up a video directly addressing peer review and some of the things that these guys have been citing. And we're also going to be putting forth Louis Ellery. He's a physiotherapist. He's going to be putting up another one that addresses these points from time to time. So I wanted to just plug that just so people are aware of it. They're going to be really good videos. I think you guys are going to like them too.
Can't wait to see them. Yeah, so this is the chart that I wanted to put up, right? And it's a very simplified version of what science actually is, like actually going from theory to observation to hypothesis to experiment. These are the steps that have to be there in order to conduct an experiment, okay? Everything else added on to that makes the observation stronger and makes the experiment stronger. But these are the steps that have to be there. Now let's take a look at each step, because that'll show how the nuances don't work with a lot of the papers that they claim to debunk you that I've seen, okay? So yes. The theory, you have to already have models in your head. You have your culture, you have your political influences there. So that already influences your observations.
Cultural patterns also has all of those things in their head when they observe. So I don't. Yeah, it's not just science.
Yeah, let's keep it going. He's making good points.
The academic model of gait is always side view. It's very linear.
Not true.
They don't take into account rotational forces, and it's through the lens of force application. They want to make you faster, so that's the lens it's usually looked upon. However,
it's not true either.
I mean, which is not necessarily bad. It has.
Okay, pause.
And I agree.
All right. That's not true. Usually, actually, gait, when we look at it, is mostly in the most literature on gait is in neurological diseases, because it's one of the markers, like having a shuffling gait for Parkinson's. It's usually about balance, center of mass. Because yeah, I mean, one of the biggest causes of death in the elderly is falling while walking. So I don't even know where that's from. No one's trying to make people faster while walking in science. Like it's very rare, right? It's not the goal. Otherwise we'd be running. Walking is not an efficient way to move fast. It's also not always looking sideways. There's usually force plates, and then they take a front and the side view, and usually they have like an average of at least 30 light receptors. I'd argue, because these guys are GOTA guys, I'd argue GOTA is the one that does sideways and front. They do like 2D images. Science uses 3D imaging. It's actually pretty cool if you've seen it before. You can actually render it almost like CGI, right? It's almost like you're doing mocap. So we actually see 3D. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know what they're on about. I've never understood that argument. It's like slow-mo footage is not new, guys.
It's been the same thing in the back squat video, where they keep obsessing about just pure speed. Like there's so many other things that we look at.
Yeah.
Agree with that. Like we do max sprint tests to at least on a treadmill, on a non-motorized treadmill. We do max sprint tests to see if somebody's velocity has gone up. after we got them from starting to ending, and we've gotten people who weren't in pain to increase their speed, at least on a treadmill, when we were working with clients and whatnot. So
Pause. I like how it's incredible. Like, he thinks that it's more impressive because people were in pain and they got faster. It's like me saying I'm a good physio because I get my patients in pain stronger. It's like, yes, you have less pain, so there's less arthrogenic muscle inhibition. So they get faster, they get stronger because they can access to more of their strength and speed, right? The defense mechanisms kind of go down as the pain goes down naturally. It's less impressive because they're in pain. It's not more impressive. It makes no sense. Also, like, taking sprinting times and sprinting velocity is nothing new. I used to do that as a soccer coach when I was like 16. You do that as a coach. Like, what the fuck? It's not whatever. And every science paper on sprinting does that too. Whatever, keep going.
Count what the things that they're testing. I think they're still relevant, and I'm assuming you guys are coming from that same position, right?
Yeah, I'm not discounting any of that. I'm just saying that the theory that you hold from the models that you have in your head will guide your observations, right? So
yes.
Yeah, so that's what that means there. And then from the observation to the hypothesis, you have to take the variables. You have to find the cause and effect. This is where they really mess up when they're trying to disprove FP, because they're not taking the variables that you claim that, which I don't actually know, and we can maybe dig
in all fairness, guys, the main thing that I talked about way back in the day, I was known as the guy that would, everybody at that time was putting hashtag do you even lift, bro? And I was saying, I put hashtag do you even rotate, bro? Like, do you even like get outside of the sagittal plane of motion? That was my thing. Do you even contralaterally reciprocate? Do you ipsilaterally reciprocate? It's like, do you perform these functions? Yes or no? Now look, there's people that talk about whether you should be in a knee valgus, knee varus, whether you should have a flat foot, whether it should be an overly arched foot, high ankle. It's like you have every single, like, is a scapular wing okay? Is it not? Is a forward head okay? Because forward head doesn't indicate that you're going to end up having neck problems or whatever. It's like, I don't make claims on any of those things because there's so many factors that go into predicting a person's pain that you can't just say, hey, you have a forward head, so therefore your neck is going to hurt. I used to make those kinds of mistakes way back in the day until you work with somebody and you're like,
it's gonna mess it up.
Doesn't hurt? Your neck doesn't hurt? No, my shoulder hurts, but I have a forward head posture. I'm like, okay, well, how are those correlated?
There you go.
My hip hurts and I have a forward head. Be like, but your pelvis doesn't seem that bad. What the hell is going on? It's like, it's much stranger than we suppose, and I feel that this entire industry is just suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's very slow. Like, people just operate very, very slow. Like, this is one thing that I've talked about before where I'm like, you have like boxers. There was one guy I got into it with. It was a semi-good faith discussion, but it wasn't really good faith because the guy was still pissed off at me. And so I asked him, I'm like, hey, bro, do boxing coaches get boxers to have better mechanics and get more punching output in their craft? And the guy didn't really want to answer it. I'm like, hey, I'm going to repeat the question because there's certain things that you have to do when you're going to trap somebody. And I got him to finally answer the question. I'm like, did they use any force plates for that? Did they use any light sensors for that? Did they use any of these technologies in order to figure that out? Or did they just use their two freaking eyes to figure that out? And they're obviously...
Yeah, there's a difference between research and research application, right? I don't use MRIs to know that a lot of changes in patients are asymptomatic. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't need to, right? Because the research is out there. Research has a lot more money than a single clinician has. It's not our job their job is to apply research in a way that best suits their patients based on experience. It's not to conduct research yourself. It's such a weird, I don't know. Does he think that's what's funny? Naudi says I represent the like scientific consensus or whatever. I'm literally just a dumb guy making memes online. I'm not Peter O'Sullivan or like Chad Cook or, Greg Lehman. That's the thing, that these guys criticize science, but I don't think they've read enough of it to kind of understand. They make a lot of claims, right? So the thing about like measures, they don't do this measure. It's like, yes, actually they do, like a lot. And I don't know. It's pretty interesting. Yeah.
I just think it's odd that you just go to the boxer and say, oh, he didn't use any fancy tools. He just uses eyes. But like the reason why we use the fancy tools is because it's very controlled, it's very precise, and it helps us get a better measure of what's actually happening. With your eyes, it's not going to be very precise.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of uncontrolled variables in the environment that are also influencing the boxer's performance, not just what the what the coach did.
And we validate the methods too, right?
Right.
So if we say, like, if we look at strength training and we say, hey, is that going to make the boxer stronger or like punch harder? We can measure it in the lab, and then after that we can apply it in real life.
And the methods are repeatable. I don't know why they keep saying they're not repeatable. This is literally the point of a method section. You write your things out.
Yeah.
You write your method section out so other researchers can replicate it.
Yeah, and the
whole thing about repeatability. So I don't get this.
They're going to talk about the argument about repeatability, I'm pretty sure. Like the replication crisis. It is much bigger in psychology. In physio, it's smaller. So there was a paper recently. I mean, a lot of papers are not replicable, but it's really not as bad as people say.
I think I just sent you a psych paper today about like 2 studies not replicating.
Yeah.
At that point, it's like, you know what you're talking about is completely. I get a paragraph. It always is followed up with some kind of a paragraph, completely saying that what you're doing is scientifically founded upon, and then I'm left to ask about a few more questions, and then they just stop responding. And I'd simply just say, hey, if wrestling coaches, jiu-jitsu coaches, track coaches, and all these people are improving technique on athletes with their pure eyes. Like Usain Bolt's coach doesn't look like, based upon the videos that I saw, it looks like they were just on some dirt track with very primitive tools. And I could measurably see Usain Bolt's techniques get better and better as time passes. And they're not using fancy equipment. So like, but to go back on the whole thing on what I do, it's like, you can have a theory on motion, a theory of movement, and it could be correct. How do you make it work? That's the part that I'm most concerned about, right? You have A and Z, right? You have point A to point Z. How do you deal with the alphabet in between? That's what functional patterns is. So quite literally, and I'll just tell you guys this much right now, everybody has every theory that's out there. All of it's relevant. Most of it is relevant, believe it or not. Most of it carries its relevance. How do you make it work? And the only way you're going to make it work is if you utilize the system that I put forth, because my system actually puts all the variables together so we can actually apply. So my vision has, I get things wrong all the time, just so everybody understands. I don't look at my practice as being perfect. The second if I go into like grab one of my pulleys, or I grab a few if I grab a few tools and I start doing work, I would literally, I could literally create 30 new things, 40 new things that to most people would be like, holy shit. And I've done it. And people were like, what the fuck? You know, like when I have people live with me and they see me train clients, they'll have a supposition. Anytime somebody's new, they'll have a supposition as to how I train a client. Oh, this is how Naudi's going to approach it. And then I do it completely different than what they were even imagining. And like, I'll create things on the fly and they'll be like, oh my God, that's amazing. And in my mind, I'm just thinking, that's nice that you're seeing all the good things that seem to be coming with what I'm talking about. Because if you saw what I saw in terms of all the errors that I'm making and all the variables that I'm not accounting for, you might go crazy. Because what I account for is very little, and what there is to account for is a lot. There's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot that I don't know. So that's why when I see people that are so apt to talk about core bracing, whether we should be an anterior, posterior pelvic tilt, whether we should flex our spine when we lift, or whether we should extend our spine, I'm just kind of like, the subject matter is, if I address in one session, if I address the entirety of, in one session, in an hour, if I address the entirety of the theories that are brought up on biomechanics in 1 hour, then that tells you to the degree of how slow this system operates. So I don't like to participate. I operate at a certain pace, and it's like, the pace that I operate in is hard to understand. I brought people that are very scientifically minded around me, and that were like, you know, that had a traditional background, that had masters and you know, like bachelors in like exercise science, rehab, things of that nature. And they have a supposition that I'm very mathematical by how I do things, but I'm not. I'm a Mexican, and Mexicans are very good. Mexicans are very good at building houses. We're very good at building things, and you know how we do it? That seems about right. Let me just put this here. If I don't brace that thing there, then that area right there might begin to fall, and that could be problematic. So that's how I've looked at it. It's very intuitive how I go about it. But by what I mean by intuitive is that my brain processes data in a similar way to a dog fetching a ball when it jumps in the air, and it's like it's processing information. The complexity of that data is far beyond the grasp of what our forebrain can even calculate. And so on my end, when I think about when I think about the debates and when people ask me like, Naudi, what do you do? I can't really put it into words, because words themselves, it's like, let me put it this way. The second I try explaining what I'm doing, Anthony and Will, the second I try explaining it is like I've literally lost 50% of the idea by opening my fucking mouth and speaking. I've already lost it. So that's why what I've done, I've tried to explain this, and I've done this. I made the mistake of doing this too long, trying to explain everything that I was doing, and then it impeded my potential to keep researching effectively. And so what I've done...
Boss, that's just too much. Okay, first of all, he talks about replicability. He just explained why his method is not replicable, because he just makes it up on the fly. First thing. Second hilarious part about the Mexican thing. Incredible. What else did he say? Like, he said so much. Oh yeah.
He makes up 30 to 40 different movements in one session.
Yeah, and everyone's like, wow, what a narcissist. Yeah, and then it's like, wow, his system's so great that only he can understand it, and then it's the only system on earth that works, but he's forgetting so many variables. He's like, you know how he says that he's making up a lot of the system? He's making up what he's saying. It's like that joke about like Michael Scott saying, sometimes I start a sentence that I don't know where it's going to end. I just keep going and I hope that I find my way. That's kind of what he's doing. It's so narcissistic. He's like, yeah, I figured it out. I'm the only one that has the complete system out of everyone. It's never been done in humanity. It's never been done. The only one.
Well, to be fair, he said it's not fully complete yet because he doesn't know what it is.
Yeah, but he's the only one.
Well, how are you? I'm curious now. Like, he said he was gonna publish like RCTs on this.
He's not gonna do that. That's a lie.
But how are you supposed to publish an RCT if you can't?
You can't. He's preparing to cop out and say that we can't.
Right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it's like how is this replicable if you can't even like put your own methodology into words?
It's not. And yeah, he's talking about like he says how he addresses all of biomechanics in one session. I don't think you do, man. Like, no. Like, seriously. Like, first of all, the learning effect is going to be minimal. Like, if you look at studies on learning, like even if you look at coaching, right? If you have a soccer team or like a basketball team, if you ask them, if you measure it, I think there was a study that said that it's something like they can remember like at most like 1 or 2 messages. So when I used to coach my kids, I would be like, you know, like you do a lot of stuff and then you go like, oh, take home, like we'll take on the field message. It's like these 2 things. We got to be really good on these 2 things. Cause if you tell them 50 things, they're not going to remember. Right. Yeah. It's not the time to learn how to play, but he's like, what is he covering all of biomechanics in just a single session? That's just ridiculous. Anyways, incredible.
Keep going.
Yeah.
I kind of just told my community, everybody around me, where I'm like, don't infect my research with your findings. Don't talk to me. I don't want to fucking hear it, because the second you infect me with it, now I can't get what you said out of my head. And now the only thing that I can see are the things that you're telling me to look at, and the things that you're looking at might be relevant, but they're probably not relevant, and they're too reductionistic in order for me to actually look at it. So quite literally over the last 3 years, I've kind of been off in no man's land trying to investigate mechanics, because the second I try and explain specific phenomenon, I'm like, fuck. Anytime I try and encapsulate it in words, it becomes a problem. At some point I do. And quite literally, I'll be honest to you guys, I don't actually put what I'm learning into words until I do an HBS course. I don't even do it. I don't even try explaining it. So quite literally, the first time that I run an HBS course is when I'm explaining my positions, what I've learned up until that point. Prior to that, I don't put it into words. And to actually do it is like, that's enough. To try and put it into words is beyond it's beyond language in many regards. It's beyond quantification at this point, because we don't have the tools to truly measure what the fuck is going on inside of the body. We really don't we don't fully know how fascia even works inside the body. We have tension dynamics, and then I believe we also, and you guys could, I don't know, you have pressure dynamics that are inside of the body. I don't really know how it works. I don't really know how muscles work. To take it a step further, and before I have you guys kind of interject, when people look at muscle imbalance, it's not really muscle imbalance. What we have is bone malformations that work around, and muscles that work around bone malformations. What people in this industry fail to recognize is that we're degenerated. We've consumed grains, we've consumed polyunsaturated fats, we've had wars, we've had famines, we've had plagues, we have all this shit that has made, and then on top of that, we've had sedentarism, we've had farming. Farming, it has pattern overloads or repetitive patterns in farming that you're going to find that are going to be damaging to the body. We've done so much to damage ourselves compared to what we were at our peak when we were in Africa. And when I look at human beings, what I'm looking at are essentially walking and talking distortions. You can't correct muscle imbalance until you actually reform bone. And in order to reform bone, then that means that you have to potentiate muscles all the way down to the periosteum level when you're going to make a biomechanical change. And this is what I suspect that I've been doing. I saw this a long time ago, and I'm like, anytime I would do a corrective procedure, anytime I would try and correct something, I'd do a stretch, I'm like, yes, this is fine. Yes, this is reducing a person's pain. Anytime that I would use a biopsychosocial model intervention by simply just talking to the person and telling them, hey, man, like this is kind of mental, and you need to chill the hell out. You're like I'm taking you to a basic range of motion. You need to relax. It's fine. Your knee can move that way. It's fine. Like anytime I've done that, I'm like, yes, that's great. I help the person solve the pain either biomechanically or mentally. The question then therein lies, there's always been something missing. And the missing link has been, how do I reform bone? Because that person does not look like an athlete. If I want the average Joe to operate like an athlete, then they have to look like an athlete. And they need to have the actual physical framework of a Bo Jackson or a Barry Sanders or a Michael Jordan. Like we don't have that framework. So even when people talk about muscle balance, because at some point we're going to probably get into this discussion about muscle balance, people don't even know how far that goes. Like if you're a pitcher and your humerus is twisted, good luck trying to stretch your way out of that situation. Good luck trying to position your body in a certain way to get you out of that position. The only way you untwist the humerus is if you actually potentiate the musculature through a kinetic chain to untwist the humerus. And to find that kind of coordination, it's so fucking difficult. It's so difficult. And so this is what I mean with the industry operating from the Dunning-Kruger effect. They think that they're doing a lot more than what they are. And I suffered from the Dunning-Kruger effect for quite some time until I kept supposedly correcting people's postures and then seeing them fall right back to moving like shit and having their pain come back after working with them for 2 years.
Okay, pause. Holy shit, he just says things. Where do we start? So much bullshit.
With the bone plane?
Yeah, grains cause bone imbalances, which causes muscles imbalance.
Apparently PUFAs do that too.
What does that?
Polyunsaturated fats.
Oh yeah, they're against seed oils as well and like sugar, I think. First of all, completely baseless. You just make shit up and it goes again. And you know, we should listen to him because he openly says he doesn't understand how muscles work. So probably is the reference for however muscle imbalances work. Second of all, he says he quantifies movement. And then in this podcast, he says he doesn't. It's not quantifiable. So again, I think from listening to him, I think it's very clear that he's making shit up on the fly. Like he quite literally said it. Yeah. And just people fall for it. That's incredible.
I'm definitely going to agree with you on that. I literally don't understand what's going on. What they're
saying. Yeah. Like, does he even know what myosin and actin are? Like, honestly, do you think he knows that? I figure he's heard of it, but like, I don't know.
I'm sure he's heard of it.
Yeah.
He's probably thinking about it like that we don't have the full picture or something.
Yeah. He's definitely not the kind, like, I'm pretty sure he's never uttered these words like, oh, I don't know. I don't have enough information on this topic to have a strong opinion. I bet this guy would talk to him about a country he's never heard of, and he definitely has a very strong opinion about it. And he knows why their country is not going well. I could have made up that country. Hey, what do you think about Scaldavia? I'll be like, oh, their president's an asshole. Their government just faltered through because they didn't implement good economics or some shit. he's like so certain about things that he has no knowledge about. And then it's incredible that he keeps referencing the Dunning-Kruger effect when talking about the entire industry, who has like very, like, first of all, more experienced people than him, people that have gotten better results, and people that have made more research than he did. Incredible. Like, and then he says it's Dunning. Like, what arrogance does it take? I don't know. It's pretty mind-boggling. I'm just gonna go get a beer, man. This is too much. Fuck.
Yeah, go ahead.
And the thing he's talking about, I think, and like ironically kind of falls into the point where we're talking about, where Greg Lehman actually interjected when I posted about the Hot Movement Optimist Summer. And he said that Hot Movement Optimist Summer is not only about having a positive outset, like thinking, oh, most movements are safe. It's also that we acknowledge that most biomechanical models are not, they're not perfect. We can't completely rely on them. They're not reliable or actionable, right? Because the body operates more, not like a machine, but like a stochastic ecosystem. So like if you look at the studies on discs, right? Most, you can't really use them because if there is degeneration, they're going to behave in unpredictable ways. I think it's like a 30% of discs don't behave like in the disc models if you look in vivo. So it's like, do we actually know if you bend, the disc is going to go that way? No. Do we know if you extend it, it's going to go that way? We actually don't. If I did some calculation on a tablecloth, like a napkin mat equation, and it's basically, if you're 30, the disc, there's like a 50% chance that the models don't actually apply to you. So it's he's kind of making a point for us that, like, hey, it's very, biomechanics in humans are extremely complex. Correcting it is extremely complex. So if your goal is to reduce pain, why would you focus on that? Seems like a lost cause, or just statistically a bad bet, right? When there's so many things you can address, like low tolerance, kinesiophobia, and other things. Like, if you look on the mediation analysis, like the ones that Mansell did, people get better more because they're less afraid of moving, not because they're stronger or because they're because they're moving better, right? So it's just, again, we're not saying the biomechanics don't matter. It's just that it's probably not your best bet if you have one thing to address.
There's a ton of other factors.
Yeah.
Naudi pointed that out too. He said it's very complex. He said there's psychosocial factors going on. Yeah. But it's just the way he thinks about how they interact is problematic.
Yeah, absolutely.
The way we think about it is that they're all kind of impacting each other in many different ways. Versus him, it's like psychosocial factors will impact biomechanics, and biomechanics cause pain.
Yeah, and I think it kind of ties into his views on women, where he's not like a troglodyte who thinks like women suck. He's just kind of complexified toxic masculinity, if that makes sense. So I would call it like a form of like advanced essentialism, where how he brings everything back to biomechanics.
Sure, yeah.
If you look at his views on women, he acknowledges that society is changing and all that stuff, but he's bringing it all back to like reproduction and function.
Yeah.
Right? As if we had to function as human beings who are hunting and gathering still. Right? We're not. It's not fun. I don't want to hunt and gather. I want to play video games or play soccer and do stuff that's completely stupid. I want to have sex for fun, not to have babies. Maybe I want kids someday, but you know what I mean? So it's like, he's kind of missing the mark because he has all these he has like the ideas in his head. I'm pretty sure he reminds me of my dad, honestly. Like if he had a more formal education, I think he would be very smart, but he's just missing one part. And I'm not saying there's some people that are extremely smart and have no education. Some of the smartest people I've met, but I think he's not one of these people. I think he would have needed something more rigorous to learn how to think systematically and more critically of his own ideas. Yeah.
All right, let's keep going.
Yeah.
Hard for these guys to recognize like what it means, what long-term results mean, because they don't even know how to retain clientele. Like I am a retention master. You guys know how many HBS2s and HBS3s I have? How many HBS ones I have? That's retention.
Jesus Christ.
I know how to retain people because I put forth value. So when you can retain an individual and you can train them, guess what happens after 2 years and you implemented the same intervention over and over again? The benefit wears off. And what do you do when it wears off? Do you just refer out or do you make an adjustment? Sometimes I would refer out, and guess what happened? They would refer out, they would do okay for about 3 months until the intervention of that other practitioner stopped working. And guess what? They would be like, hey, Naudi, you kind of have to figure this out, bud, because I got to go to work. And if I can't go to work, I can't pay my bills. And I have like massive amounts of debt, Naudi. You know, like these are successful people, and they're like, I have massive amounts of debt. And if I don't show up to my job as an engineer or as an auto mechanic, I'm going to go bankrupt. And that's not going to go well. So in essence, I have to hire you to try and solve my problem because I've already done all the traditional therapies. I don't want to get into that. I've already done the yoga. I've already done all this shit. And now I need you to solve my problems. Those are the pressures that have brought me to realize that I was operating in the Dunning-Kruger effect. But it's hard for people to get that experience when they can't even retain somebody for more than 2, 3 months, 4 months. If you can't retain a client for an extended period of time, it's going to be very difficult for you to even understand what I'm talking about. And physical therapists, for how long do physical therapists, if I'm going to ask you this, William or Anthony, if you guys know, how long do physical therapists typically work with people for?
Oh, it could vary anywhere from, a day to a year, right? Or
most of the time, it's 10 sessions. From what I've talked to, because you have many physical therapists that are in FB, most of the time it's like 10 sessions.
Yeah, pause.
It has been for a year.
First of all, that's not true. If you I looked at a poll from a physical therapist on average, and I think that's overtreatment. It's one of my big gripes with physios. Most treat 2 to 3 times per week. That's like the average. So, and right away, and they treat for at least 6 weeks, right? Because that's how long most conditions last, at least. Yeah. So, straight up, he's wrong and lying, or just uninformed again. Second, I try to treat I'm probably one of the physios, honestly, maybe on earth, who treats like the least, because that's one of my metrics. I just try to treat as least as possible because that's how I would like to be treated. Just be very independent and teach people kind of how to fish rather than give them a fish. Right. And the reason I do that is because I don't need to see them, right? It's like if you have 2 clinicians, one is treating the problem in 3 sessions, and then you have one who's treating it in 3 years and 40 sessions. Which one is the best clinician? Now he's arguing that he is. And it's like his methods work so well that you need to keep doing it forever. Yeah. Which doesn't make sense. Like functional patterns, by the way, is very aggressive as a practice. You need to do it very frequently and very aggressively in a very stringent and non-flexible way, right? It's like these movements, and you need to always be mindful of biomechanics. My goal is to get people as quick as possible to a point where they're like, hey, you can just do the shit you like without having pain, or you have pain and it's fine. You know what I mean? You're not going to get injured. And then getting back to what you value is probably going to make the pain better. So it's very interesting that he's using like an inverted metric, which most people would agree is like a bad metric. The 10 session figure, is the minimum. So there's a study that's been done in Australia for ACLs, and 10 sessions seems to be the kind of like the plateau where you need to reach at least 10 sessions to have a good outcome in physio. Less than that, and people seem to do significantly worse. So those are the patients that I see at least 10 sessions. I'm like, hey, it's going to take at least 10 sessions, and we're going to follow up at least 9 months to a year and a half. And usually it's a year and a half, because unless you're a pro athlete, almost everyone needs like about a year and a half or 14 months. So yeah, he just doesn't know the numbers, and doesn't understand why we try to get people to be independent, not dependent on a system. It's not, you're basically saying that you're a good marketer, but you're not a good clinician.
Yeah, I wonder if he's just talking about pain here, or if he's talking about like other things, because the client retention stuff doesn't make sense for people in pain.
He's talking about HBS, so HBS are coaches.
Okay.
But I think he teaches people to have good retention, and he's like, they're following them for longer and getting better results. It's like, hey, they've exhausted all the first line treatment, and then they get to you at a point where they're like, it's been longer, so it's more likely that it's going to go away, right? If, because if we look at things that last long, it's like what, 6 months to a year. They see you after 6 months, and then they magically get better with you. I don't know. Like statistically, they're coming at a good time. That's what we're going to talk when we talk about survivorship bias, right? It's like there's a pre-selection process.
That's just natural history.
It might be, again, I think it works, but I think a lot of it, and I think we should do a series on why we think it works. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he gets people really want to believe in it. And he treats them a lot. So you get the non-specific effects are like through the roof. Right. And they're moving in a way that feels safe to them, I guess. Anyways, keep going.
And usually that's what I end up asking a physical therapist. If you're suggesting that you do what I already do, or that what I do is ineffective, I want to see your results. I want to see that you've actually gone through the rigors that I've had to in order to come to the findings that I have about the human body. Let me see your results if you work with somebody for a year. It's like I said, bro, it's hard for me to put this into words, guys. It's very difficult to put into words because quite literally, there's so many people in this field that talk a big fucking game, and it's very easy to sound very certain of yourself when you show somebody a technique and then you run away and then you leave the person off to do their own thing. But when you had to work with somebody and then you hit that wall of your understanding and then the person's still in pain and then you have to find a new way to help them solve that pain that's not in any textbooks, that's not in any educational curriculum, that's when you really begin to find out what you're about in this. And this is what I push FP practitioners to deal with. I put them through these circumstances, which are fucking horrifying. There's nothing worse than being in front of a client and then being like, so you're in pain and I don't know how to fix this. How do I explain myself? How do I convince you to continue to keep going down this path with me so I can help you troubleshoot your mechanics? It's a very uncomfortable thing. And I don't think most of these people know this, bro. I don't think that most scientists know this because it's experiential. You only know it. Brett Contreras learned it. Brett Contreras, he challenged me to a debate. He learned it. Brett Contreras back in 2015 challenged me to a debate. He said that what I was talking about was scientific. I then said, okay, about 3-4 years after that, I'm like, oh, Brett, let's have a comparative analysis between your method and my method. We'll test it on 50-year-olds. Let's test it on 50-year-olds and see how it does. You use your hip thrust or whatever it is that you do, and I'll use my method, and we'll see which athletes are the ones that end up being the ones that perform the best. Let's go ahead and run a comparative analysis. After that initial statement, to anybody who's watched that debate, look at the debate. This is a PhD, right? He said that what I was doing was scientifically unfounded upon. I bring up the challenge and I say, let's put our balls on the table. After my initial statements, Brett Contreras makes a concession speech about how science is not fully reliable. I'm just like, I was shocked. I came with a gauntlet of information that was going to completely destroy his outdated notions that he realized later on down the line as he trained more people after he graduated and he started working with people. He's like, wait a minute, this is way more complicated than what I thought. This guy was actually way ahead of me. And he came with nothing but respect. And here we are. Right now, I'm getting massive amounts of disrespect from other people with credentials who just they haven't been slapped in the face by life well enough yet. And until you've been slapped in the face by life, it's very difficult to understand the perspectives that I'm talking about. Sorry, bro, that's a big long rant. I tend to do that.
There are so many points that
you have anything to summarize on that?
Yes, 100%. I mean, there was this idea that kind of came forward about an intuitive approach based on the practical application of information and observation, and that was. I took a personal training certification. This is like 10 years ago. I took a personal training certification, but I started training people because I had lost 100 pounds. And I started, working out in the gym, and I started to get myself results, and I had this experiential thing. And what I noticed is that depending on the problem that my client had or their inability to do particular exercises, even in conventional weightlifting training and stuff, you have to think of stuff on the fly based on what you're observing in their body. And your subconscious mind can process information so much faster than your rational thinking mind necessarily can. What happens when you're talking about how you operate at a certain speed, and the thing that kind of came up for me was the speed of trying to take data and information based on papers and trying to apply it to specific contexts. So you almost have to imagine the context that it would be relevant in. But the reality is you have a specific context in front of you right now experientially. I said this on recent podcasts where we're talking about concepts about movement, but movement is not conceptual. Someone in the chat here, they mentioned Ido Portal, who said that information is toxic as it pertains to movement specifically. The experiential reality of movement and the experiential reality of the context that you're going to be in with another person, you're processing information much faster and creating specific contexts that are going to be very, very hard to address if you're just relying on, well, this paper said this, so this is the truth, so I'm going to start to hyperimpose this model of what I believe reality is of movement onto my context, rather than letting the context of the reality kind of shape your model. And that's kind of really...
Keep this in mind. There is a mathematical model to this. Like there's positions that we tip. Like if I work with wrestlers for a while, if you work with wrestlers, you're going to tend to find that there's like probably a set of about 25 positions they're going to fall into, and they're going to make transitions between these 25 positions at some point or the other. Some of them dominate with certain positions more than the others. I believe that movement can be, when you say it can be conceptual, what do you mean that it can't be conceptual?
Well, I just mean the actual experience. It's sort of, the map is not the territory. The finger pointing at the moon isn't the moon itself. The ideas about movement are not movement itself. It's maybe a little, philosophical, because the description of the movement is not the movement itself. The description covers angles and aspects and variables of the movement, but it's not the totality of the movement itself.
I agree with that fully, but then in the same token, some maps are better than other maps, right?
Yes.
And that's so in that sense, you want to. The idea is constantly revising the map to make sure that it does represent the territory a little bit more effectively, and that's what I always focus on.
Well, and
yeah, so they're suggesting that the science doesn't take into account enough variables, but none of their variables are quantifiable. Science looks at moments, force rate, position, angular velocity. They look at, hey, it looks good. This looks good, and then they use coach's eye, and like two planes of motion. Naudi doesn't even use it, and he said it's mathematics. No, Naudi, it is not mathematics. You need numbers for mathematics. Right? You're lying. That's a complete lie.
He said 25 positions, so therefore it's a mathematical model.
Yeah, one number.
That's how
counting is maths. I'm actually really good at math. I can count to 1 million. I don't get it.
Yeah, no, I don't either, because at the end of the day, like if we can't really just quantify them, we just rely purely on experience.
Yeah, and it's always like it doesn't take into account enough variables. It's like it's taking into account more variables than you are.
Right, and it's attempting to control for variables. Like
yes, exactly.
You don't know what's working if you just.
Yeah, and there's another strawman where they think we only apply a paper and then we just do exactly the paper, and they use 30 reps. Sorry, Miss Vicky, you can't even lift 10 pounds, but we're going to do 30 reps because that's what the paper says. It's like, no, it's like, strength training helps. So I'm going to do strength training and adjust it to you. Right. We're not robots. It's just, we're using science to make an educated guess as to the patient that's in front of us. And if it doesn't work, then we go to option B, then option C. And if there's no science, we use another thing, or we refer out. That's usually what I do. I just refer. Right? It's like an algorithm almost,
it's like,
or a flow chart.
Yeah, Eric Mayer's a funnel plot kind of uses.
Yeah, that's what I use.
We start with the evidence, we filter that through, and then after that we conform it to the individual.
Yeah, and my patients use a lot of stuff that's not evidence based, but it's always like they're like, "Hey, foam rolling makes me feel really good. What do you think about it?" It's like, does it make you feel good? Keep doing it. And if they hate it, I'm like, well, there's no strong evidence for it, so you don't need to do it. If you want to do it, do it. Yeah. But it's just, I want people to have informed consent as to what the data says and what statistically is the likelihood that it's going to help or do anything. Right? The same way you'd want to if you're taking drugs. Right? If I tell you that Tylenol is just a placebo, you would not want to take it. And it's funny because it's probably the same kind of people. They're going to say, there's a lot of people who are anti-science who are going to rail against antidepressants. They're saying, oh, it's just like a placebo. It's like, yeah, how do we get to that conclusion? Because of science. I don't know. Whatever. It's selective anti-scientism, which is interesting to me. Even now you mentioned it at the beginning with hormones. If it's not about biomechanics, it's okay. Science works. But if it's about my field, I can just make shit up. Right? Because that's how it works.
Entirely arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
Keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Here, when we're talking about theory in terms of the models, the cultural, political, that's 100% what you were getting to, kind of, right? I think he's frozen. Maybe Will?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I wanted to talk about I've heard you say that you wanted to make does that mean
I can't really hear you.
Hold on.
Actually, prove the confidence. How would you take variables? Because this
Not the only ones having technical difficulties.
That just because your internet cut out there for a second. You there?
I think we lost him.
Yeah.
Okay, go.
Do you want to?
No.
Alexis.
Yeah.
Do you want to go like 10 more
Check
minutes?
one. Sorry. Will.
Yeah, sure.
Am I back in?
You're back in. Yeah, you're back.
And then
Sweet.
45
Okay, I was saying I've heard that I've heard you say actually that you want FP to be validated, through scientific rigor.
Oh,
and
that's
it
good.
Could be,
yeah,
that could be good. You keep going. Let's just listen to that.
He's cutting out again. But
how do you expect to go through that process, and how could you take the cause and effect of the variables?
Here, I'm gonna.
You got the point there.
Wait, do you want to go like 10 more minutes and then
Sure.
do like the last 45, save it for a part 2?
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of late, and I gotta.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. All right, let's go 10 more minutes.
So Will's completely cutting out, but I know the question. I know the question that he's going to ask. Yeah.
How do you address the context of so many different variables with functional patterns? If I change your viscoelastic properties, then I'm going to change the source, essentially the source code for how you behave altogether. That's essentially it. So there's the source code to how you move in space. What I'm essentially doing is I'm going to if everybody has a viscoelastic, I'll give you an example of this. Should we wait till Will gets back so he can respond?
I can. I'll recap when he comes back. He might be.
I'm gonna have to hook up my charger, bro, because it's actually my phone's getting closer to dead than it is alive. So let me go ahead and hook this guy.
And Will and
I. Dude,
on
his phone.
The real question is, he was saying it's like, okay, well, I know Naudi wants to validate FP through scientific rigor. The issue is that most science right now, as it pertains to the people solving biomechanical problems, are looking at specific variables specific to their models. So when you're looking at validating some of the principles of FP, what are the variables that you're going to be looking to test, and how are you going to create a proof of concept through testing specific variables?
That's a good question. I guess running speed would probably be one of them. Checking how much improvements in a person's vertical leap. It would pretty much just be, okay, did somebody become more athletic utilizing these protocols? Then that would probably be it. I would want to actually also test it on an older group of people as well, because most of the studies that you look at as it relates to developing athletic performance, most of the time are done on people who are young and who are already more physically resilient to dysfunctional stimuli. And what I would want to do is actually display how we could actually take people who are in their 50s and 60s and make them more athletic. How we could actually get them. At some point, I'd want to look at their genes. I want to see if we're triggering any epigenetic effects on them. I want to see if we actually potentially lengthen telomeres. It's quite literally, I just want to get the craft figured out. I mean, mental health. How do you quantify mental health is a question, but FP has helped many people with mental problems. People with drug addiction is like a pretty common one. People who are dealing with drug addictions, addictive behaviors in general. It's kind of like I just want to develop the system, create harmony in the body, make it change the viscoelastic consistency of the body, and then after that, people can decipher how many things this is going to apply to. Because I don't think that there's not going to be anything it doesn't apply to when it's all said and done. You're essentially talking about structuring the body to either behave functionally or dysfunctionally. And our society seems to structure it to become dysfunctional. And what I mean by you guys know what I mean by functionality, right?
They're not women.
What is your definition of functionality as it pertains to your particular system? Because to make
something work with minimal waste. So like an internal combustion engine works, but it has this byproduct of CO2 or carbon monoxide, which it dumps into the environment. So on my end, I'm thinking, okay, how do we solve for the negative externalities that are associated with my working system? So the whole idea is, does a bicep curl work yes, how you do the bicep curl matters, and you make it more functional by optimizing it in relation to a specific. You have to optimize it in relation to a specific situation, but even specific to the anatomy of a human organism and why we even developed the bicep to begin with. So really, to be functional is really to just minimize waste, to account for negative externalities. That's what I mean by functionality, and I believe that that's really the actual definition of truly making something more functional is to minimize waste. And people have tried to make it out. It's taken me quite some time to come up with that definition, and it's a really
Pause.
One of the protocols that I do, and you do them well, it's really hard to fucking argue.
He's literally just describing running economy. Like that's something scientists have been doing for years. You just look at the oxygen consumption in relation to the running speed or whatever. I don't remember the exact equation, but it's extremely simple to, like I used to do that for my master's project. It's very simple. And what was the other thing? He also, it's incredible. Like I hope if he does research, he has a research team around it, because he doesn't understand all the variables he's talking about. First of all, the budget would be incredible. Just using a DNA sequencer is like $1.5 million. There were some with Miguel in the lab. And that's not for epigenetics. That's just for regular genetics, right? Right. We're reading papers for the Alex Valgas post we had. The one he's talking about are like state of the art. So that would be several $1 million for research. That paper that he's talking about, you need financing from the government, but also the amount of variables that he mentioned, just right there, those like 6 variables. The power that for this research to be powered, it would take like 500 participants at least. I mean, I don't know. He says he's a retention master, so maybe you can find them, but it's just more of a control group would be hard to find.
And then you'd also have to define functional patterns in your methods.
Yeah, I heard that's one of the cop-outs he's going to go out with, that you would have to disclose how it works.
Right.
So that it would be a breach of intellectual property, which, by the way, hilarious. Like, there's the guy who discovered the treatment for cholera, and the one he said, oh, no, I'm not going to put a patent on it. The one who discovered insulin, like Frederick Banting discovering insulin, and he was like, I'm not going to put a patent on it because you can't would you put a patent on the sun or something? And this guy is like, oh, I invented this like movement system. I'm going to fucking sue everyone who tries to copy it. It's pretty incredible.
Or just kick them out of functional patterns.
Mm-hmm.
He's done that, right? He's kicked people out.
I have a friend who literally just asked him a question, and he's been trying to join functional patterns for 4 years. Very well meaning. The guy, like, he loves functional patterns, and we're in good terms because we agree about, like, we just want to encourage exercise, and for him, functional patterns just another way to make people move, and which is kind of the way I see it. It's just more like he likes it, right? And that's all he did. And he apologized multiple times to multiple practitioners, and he's still banned 4 years later. And he's contacted like the HQ and everything just because he asked a question. And his question was like really inoffensive. It was like, I think it was like something like, if someone's obese and, they want to exercise, should we discourage them even though it's like this functional form of exercise if it's not functional patterns? And I think Naudi got mad or something and he blocked him. So it's pretty incredible. Anyway, keep going.
With that position at a certain point, because there is a wasteful way of moving and there is an efficient way of moving. And what I'm doing is moving us towards is a direction of moving without having too many byproducts of inefficiency.
Also, training doesn't need to be efficient, right? We make it inefficient so that you can do it efficiently later because you're stronger.
I don't mind. If you guys want to keep digging at me, I don't give a fuck. I deal with difficult circumstances every day, man. I have to face a difficult life, and so on mine, I have no problems. If you guys have deeper questions,
so I will. I'm going to summarize for Will a little bit. I asked specifically what variables would be tested for validating FP scientifically, and the idea of measuring athletic performance as it relates to maybe a sprint time or a vertical jump, specifically in older populations, so that younger populations that would make these positive adaptations regardless. Realistically, you can throw anything at a youthful population, but like maybe an older population, 50 and above, that has a harder time adapting, would be a better use. So in terms of designing
that variable right there, that variable would make every personal trainer, every single strength and conditioning coach, and every therapist shit their pants, because they're like, we got to get people who are already probably broken in many different regards, and then we have to fix them and then get them to move better. And I want to actually mention this: every single exercise system has a rate of injury, right? Yeah. Not FP. We have a negative injury rate. That's the thing with FP. We have a negative rate of return, and we make people do some crazier shit with their body that they could never think that they would be able to do. And we have a negative.
Oh,
rate
that guy's insane.
So we don't injure people.
First of all, that's not true. I got my DMs filled with people who were like, "Yeah, the time I felt the worst in my life was when I was doing FP." I've got a list of like 20 people who've reached out to me personally, being like, "Yeah, I hate FP and like it broke me." And like I was like, "Hey, I think I'm gonna get injured if I keep doing that." And then the FP guy was screaming at them, "No, keep doing that fucking movement, hold the position." I think they were doing chambers. And you know what? They got calf tendinopathy doing that because they should not have been doing that at that moment. And the FP guys ignored patient feedback and load management principles. And I'm not saying I never get patients injured. It's extremely rare. I think I've gotten like 2 patients injured. Well, I wasn't there. It did just go like they got injured doing the exercises at home. That's happened twice.
But it happens. It happens to everyone.
It happens to everyone. I'm not saying like, and it's probably because I'm lucky, right? Or that some people haven't told me. I haven't been taking that into account. But it's just like the arrogance to say it's a negative injury rate. It is not, and that's not how you count injuries either. Yeah,
it's just like a big survivorship bias going on.
Yeah,
like we talked about. But
and it's thought like if when we take the ASA study, right, everyone's getting stronger. Keep going. Yeah, you do.
I mean, like I have friends who work with who are personal trainers who work with 70 to 90-year-olds and get them stronger and more powerful and improve their walking speed.
Yeah,
this is pretty common. It's not just, and I've worked with that population too, and it's not that hard. It happens to other people besides FP. Like we get people more powerful.
Yeah, just recently Neil May published his PhD on this. I made a video about it.
Yeah, using
kettlebell training, like hard style kettlebell training, the Pavel Tatsulin protocol with like older people. I think they were like 75 on average or something, and they were like all deconditioned, sedentary people, and they had like a crazy retention rate. Like everyone stayed, and they got much better in terms of health. Right? It's not unique. It's not. I will say that there is some value to promoting athletics in an older population, which is something that's understudied. So credit to Naudi on this. Credit where credit is due, but there is a lot. I'd say that's an emerging field. Training elderly people, but we are doing it, right? And one of the problem is that a lot of people are demonizing movement, like Naudi, which is why old people are afraid, right? That's it. Yeah, keep going.
That paper, it doesn't have just before and after pictures, right? It actually has results.
Measurable metrics. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think the main one they used was grip strength because, ironically, it's a very good predictor of everything else. It's not a causal variable, but it's an extremely good indicator, right? Kind of like how hypertension is a really good indicator of heart disease without necessarily being a causal variable. It's more the arteriosclerosis that is. I mean, it depends how technical you want to be, but hypertension technically is not. It is related, but it's technically not causal because whatever. It's whatever. It's very complicated, but whatever. I don't want to get into that.
So, and speaking on Ido Portal, because I'm not a fan. As you guys probably know, I'm not.
Oh, it doesn't do FP if you're not a fan.
I'm not a fan is because he justifies a lot of stupid shit. And namely, I saw him talking on the Andrew Huberman podcast. My research team brought it to my attention that he was saying that if I don't push you to an injury, then I'm not really doing my job.
Yeah,
and I'm like.
That is stupid. Like, really? Yeah, that's true.
I'm like, really, there's no way of intelligently progressing somebody to a backflip without hurting their body. That just sounds like a justification because you're not able to account for enough variables. That's what it sounds like to me. That's what I'm going to take it as. And I think that's bullshit. I think at some point you have to just say, you know what? I'm not accounting for much. And this is why I become politicized, Anthony, as you mentioned before, that, I have a political outlook on things. Capitalism doesn't necessarily. I'm a capitalist. I've succeeded in capitalism. I'm succeeding in capitalism. And
that's true. You're doing a good job, Naudi.
I'm an adaptive organism. But capitalism doesn't afford us the opportunity to literally change our position very much because capitalism rewards those who have foresight instead of those who have hindsight. So Warren Buffett is very, very financially successful for what reason? Because he has foresight. That's why he has made loads of money. He's able to predict the future. Anybody who's made wise investments has happened to do that. Anybody who starts a company that can help with problems in the future is the company that ends up succeeding in the end. And so, as I see it, unless you have good foresight, it's very difficult to make it in capitalism. And what I think I did differently than other people in this industry is I didn't come into this industry thinking that I was a specialist because I had some certification or because there was a governing body that told me that I was certified or that I was good. I came into this industry knowing that I'm an idiot and that I'm not very smart and there's so much to learn and that I can learn one thing at a time, whereas reality operates at probably trillions of bits of information per second, and I'm only able to process maybe like a few bits of information per second. So I came into it with this humility, and I was telling people when I run my courses, like, hey, take what I say with a grain of salt because it's going to change. And I told people that from the very beginning, and I tell them that today. It's like, don't take what I say as fact. And I do that, and then people still want to take what I say like as if I was saying something in matters of fact instead of saying things in relation to context. And so, what put me on this subject matter, guys? What was it? Testing for variable.
Yeah.
Yes. So going back to it's really, I want to just perfect the practice, and then at that point, any scientist who wants to step up and test any variables with it, they're going to notice a difference. Because if you account for mechanical transduction at a fundamental level, you're talking to the nuclear genes directly, and if you give the nuclear genes new information through your myofascial network, through your microtubules directly into your nuclear genes, then at that point you're signaling new ways that we are going to express ourselves genetically. So at that point, it's not of interest. I don't care to test myself scientifically because I've already seen the benefits. You guys have already seen the results, and I mean, obviously, people that are on the other side that stand to lose money by me succeeding, they're going to come up with every excuse in the book to try and deny them. But there's going to come a point where the results are going to get so good, and they're already getting to that point. If you guys look at the most recent ones from the recent HBS courses, they're going to get way fucking better. So it's already too late. Cat's out of the bag, right? I've already certified enough people, and I've given them such good principles that they're going to be able to solve problems. So
okay, pause.
Down all you want.
Okay, lots of things. Let's talk about a lot about epigenetics, and I've read research in epigenetics, and so far we haven't even mapped any remotely part of it, right? We've mapped a very little part of the genome project. We've mapped the gene pretty much, but we haven't a lot of it, but we haven't mapped the what do you call it, the epigenetics. I think I'm going to be very blunt, and I'm not an expert, so take that with a grain of salt, but what I've seen is that basically what we can say is, hey, if your grandpa did coke or had a shitty diet, it's probably going to it can activate some genes up to the grandson, right? Your grandpa's diet is going to affect you, his life choices. And if you're in a big period of stress, it can trigger some genes. Or if you take drugs, or you know what I mean. So your environment affects your genes in a short-term fashion. Kind of like, you had two theories of evolution. You had the one where the giraffe reproduces to get a longer neck, and the other one was the neck grows longer during life to adapt to it.
Yeah.
The latter one is the epigenetic portion. But we can't remotely say that whenever we exercise, it's because it's triggering epigenetics. That's literally just a guess. It can, but it's not that FP is doing that alone. Every form of exercise is. And probably stuff with higher intensity is probably triggering it more if you use your brain a little, right? Because epigenetics tends to be triggered by very extreme things, right? Extreme stress, extreme levels of arousal, like with cocaine, where the recapture of the dopamine is, stopped for significant amounts of time. It's likely not going to be with medium intensity isometric exercise, chambers, or stuff that's like drastically underloaded. And the way I can say that FP is probably like not a very high intensity exercise compared to other sports is just look at the guys that do FP. Are they known for their athleticism? Like, I'm bigger than them and I'm a fucking soccer player, which is like the weakest sport. Honestly, like it's not even strong, right? Like a basketball player looks fucking huge. Like even if you take like a short, like Isaiah Thomas, he looks like a good FP practitioner. Incredible athlete, right? But he's 5'9" and he probably doesn't train that much at the gym. And then you take any average powerlifter, they would probably murder like an FP guy, except maybe Kyle Dake, but he was a beast before. And I know someone used to train wrestling. I know several people used to train wrestling with him. They're like, yeah, he was in high school and he was like a fucking machine. Like that guy is like pure talent, right? So it's not because of FP. So it's pretty incredible that they're assuming that their medium intensity exercise is the thing that's going to trigger epigenetics rather than stuff that's extremely, I'd say almost like a natural, like powerlifting or very extreme marathons, like ultra marathons, things that they frown upon, right? It just doesn't make sense from a biological point of view.
Yeah, I mean, what happens with a lot of these guys is that they'll take like an area of science that has been really understudied.
Yeah.
And they'll try and just like theorize about what happens.
Yeah, lymph, fascia.
Exactly. It's
seed oils.
It literally repeats itself.
Yeah.
And same thing here with epigenetics. Like it's a brand new field of research from my understanding. And I have a very, very, very small understanding of this. So
yeah, and I do too, but again, I'll be humble and admit it. He seems very certain about it. And again, I've seen genetic sequencers, like I've been in there and I had to study. I know Naudi hasn't done that. Like didn't do the experiment. Like I've read, what do you call it? I don't know what it's called in English. Like, I think it's like sugar flies. Have you done that experiment? It's a very classic one.
Fruit flies?
It's fruit flies, like the most replicated experiment on Earth.
Yeah.
Right. I've done that experiment. I've bred people to get the genes that we want. I used to kill the little flies, and I don't think Naudi has done that. I don't know how high school is in the States. Do you guys do that in high school, or because it's not there in Quebec? We have like a prep school.
We did some fruit fly research in undergrad.
That was the thing. Yeah, you have to be in university. I don't think Naudi's been. And again, no shit on people who haven't been to university. It's very arrogant to postulate that your whole theory revolves around something you've never even remotely studied, and you clearly haven't read the studies on. Like basically no experience. You just heard about it, probably on Andrew Huberman's podcast, which is a big misinformation guy. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, let's just go to four. Let's go to, so I calculate, let's just go to 50 and then we can split it halfway. Yeah.
But if I see it working right in front of my eyes and I see the output because I understand how to process information in an applied context, when you put it into a scientific format, it's going to be an automatic that some kind of a change is being categorized. Never mind that. How many longitudinal studies happen to exist in this industry? When you look at rehab, when you look at performance training, how many longitudinal studies are there?
A lot.
Not that many, and the variables are pretty poor. So,
but let's forget about the variables. How many longitudinal studies are there, William?
I can't tell you. I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, well, there's not many, right? You could probably, as it relates to the fitness industry, they're not testing long term.
How many longitudinal studies are there for functional patterns?
0. And just in the ASA study, they start about 20. And that's just for injuries.
Yeah.
And that's for fitness. Is he talking about fitness or rehab? Because rehab, there's a few thousand.
I think it's both, but like there's plenty. Like obviously, there's not as much as acute studies because they're harder to fund, but they're out there. And functional patterns doesn't have any longitudinal studies.
Yeah, and I honestly, I'm not kidding. I just think he doesn't know what longitudinal means, because he says he's gonna. I think for him, it means study that lasts a long time. Because whenever he says, "Oh, we're gonna prove FP, we're gonna prove FP," he says he's gonna do longitudinal. He's gonna conduct longitudinal studies. Yeah. But you can't prove FP with longitudinal studies, right? Because it's not interventional. It's not experimental. You don't have a control group, so it doesn't prove anything. I literally think it just means we don't have long-term studies. If that's what he means, he is right that there tends to be the follow-up tends to end at 1 year for rehab. There are some longer-term studies, but they're few and far between. But there's none on, like you said, there's none on FP, even short-term. So,
from my understanding, so at the end of the day, unless I see. We are not going to know what functional patterns does until 30, 40 years from now. I'm aiming for 30, 40 years from now. I defer gratification. I'm a master of it. This is what I do. I stopped training and I gave up my vanity so I could defer gratification, so I could think about getting a reward in the long term. So yeah, I mean, we could conduct all sorts of studies that validate my biases all we want, but we're not really going to know until 40 years from now. When you see one group of people that are applying what I'm talking about, and then another group of people who are choosing not to, and one looks very healthy and regenerative, and then the other one doesn't look very healthy and is degenerative, at some point it's going to be so evident, just like, the difference between riding a donkey or riding a Tesla, is going to be that evident that you don't really need to conduct a study anymore. It's going to be freaking obvious over time. And that's really what my job is to make it so fucking undeniable, to literally be the Michael Jordan of my field, so that therefore at that point it leaves nobody a single excuse to say anything. And you won't even need a scientific study to pretty much validate what I'm talking about. In the next 20, 30 years, that's going to be my prediction. And I have what I see and what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing is not lying to me from what I can tell.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I'm going to say,
go, girl.
First off, my question is, before I play devil's advocate, has anyone approached you to do a study yet?
Fuck no, bro. I have made so many public challenges. I have made so many public challenges where I've literally said, I made it's like this is a very good thing that I made a while back, and I went on Google and I typed in testicle shrinkage, and then I took an image of that, and then I put on there, I'm like, what quote unquote scientists do whenever I challenge them to put me in a scientific study and test what I'm putting forth. Their testicles shrink. They want none of this as it relates to testing it. So have I approached people about doing it? Yes. I literally went with Brett Contreras on our debate, and I challenged him to actually conducting a test on there. I'm not going to do it now. You know why? Why do people even conduct scientific studies to begin with, William? Why do people do it most of the time? Let's get political for a minute.
To get answers.
Let's validate their bias already.
For what? And for what purpose? For what purpose?
Field they're working in, they probably want to
make money.
Yeah,
increase their notoriety,
secure their survival, like that, right?
Secure their position in society. Perhaps that's why they want to do what they do. Let's just get straight to the fucking point.
You can also apply the same logic to functional patterns.
Yeah, literally the guy who's talking the most shit on planet Earth. Yeah, and it's funny because he's had a debate with Brett Contreras. It's pretty obvious that he doesn't interact with PhDs very regularly, right? You and I talk to PhDs daily. Like I talk to the leaders in our field, like, which is really weird. Like, why would you talk to me? I'm just an idiot. And I've worked in labs, and like it's literally just these guys don't give a shit. Like they're just like, hey, I'm just a fucking nerd trying to find this answer to this very fucking boring question. They don't. There is truth to the publish or perish. You didn't mention that because it's probably not that knowledgeable about it. The publish or perish thing is the thing. We're trying to change it, and again, we've talked about this before. We're gonna have posts about this once we're done criticizing FP.
And then, also the problem of publishing more positive findings than negative findings and the follower effect.
Yeah, but I'd say that's an indictment against FP because they criticize the study that we show that movement quality isn't a predictor of pain or injury. Right? But it's like, oh yeah, research bias. It's like, yes, research is biased biased towards positive results.
Yeah.
So all the results are mixed because probably a lot of the studies are either bullshit, they're the ones that are out that show positive results, or the ones that are published are missing. I looked at the Marco Zanis paper again. I think it's the Marco Zanis, the umbrella review on psychological interventions for pain, and there's something like, I think it's like something like 30% or 20% of negative results are missing. Right, these studies you just go into the drawer, the file drawer effect or a small study effect. Yeah. So if anything, that's one of the reasons why I'm extremely skeptical. I've always been in nature, but I think it's validated by science where, if something is shown to be positive, you should be more skeptical than if it's shown to not work as per science. Right. And same thing for observation, right? Because we see what we want to see. It's been shown time and time again. So yeah. And he's bringing back, I don't know. Do you actually think he asked a lot of people to do research? Because if he says that, we'll just record this and say, hey, I'll literally write a fucking protocol for you and you can go to university and do it. But do you think universities would accept that? Because any scientist who looks at this knows that the variables that this is predicated on are not like sound, if that makes sense.
You can't like we said before, you can't really define it until we can define it. Then
yeah, that's kind of on him, right?
Yeah,
that's the thing. I think he's kind of wiggling through. Right. And he
just said he doesn't want to conduct scientific studies anymore. He said they're not going to be necessary in 20 to 30 years once he shows that his population isn't degenerate.
Yeah, he's pretty smart, and that's one of the things I'll give Goda. I talked to Gary for like 40 minutes. He's really fucking nice, and he really believes in what he promotes, and I'll respect because I know he really wants to help people. We disagree on how, but I think we both get people to get moving, which is great. But he was like, yeah, Alexi, you want to fucking conduct a study, write the paper, find a PhD student, we'll fucking do it. What do you need from us? That was literally the subject of the call. He was like, okay, what do you need from us? How much involved do I need to be? I have a kid, so I need to do this. Yeah. Now he's just like, I think what he's doing, he's just working through trying to find excuses and like put like a muddy terrain so that if you want to put a study, it's like, we can't build there. We can't do this. We can't, there's the intellectual property. There's we can't quantify it. We can't, the scientists don't want me because I'm too abrasive and shit. It's kind of like taking 2 steps in advance, a little bit like a snake.
Yeah. It's the problem of all the outcome measures he wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be,
it's I don't know what the word would be, but it's sneaky, right? Sournois.
Yeah.
All right. One more minute and then we're done, I think.
Yeah.
Point, because that's what I do, bro. They're trying to secure a position in society. They're trying to secure a position within the tribe. That's what they're trying to do. I've secured my position in the tribe. People are trying it. I don't need science at this point. People are trying it, and they're like, you know what? I've gone to physical therapy. I've done all this stuff. And the reason that I'm going to this FP facility is because I tried everything, and my friend's pain is gone. Now I'm going to go to this facility and try the same thing. Oh, my pain is gone. It's completely gone. And now I don't really need to think about going to a physical therapist. And now I no longer need surgery. I don't need to even think about surgery. So that's why people end up that's why FP's going. So fundamentally, I don't need science right now. What I would like is to give my practitioners that I've taught these principles more time to refine the method. So in about 5-10 years, we do conduct studies. So then at that point, we can really solidify this. We knock it out of the ballpark. We already will knock it out of the ballpark. But I want to make this so undeniable. I want to make it to where it's like, hey, look, bro, if you look at this, it's going to be the equivalent of a person still believing that Santa Claus exists or that unicorns exist, right? If you still believe in that obsolete method, that's how obvious I want to make it. Did Michael Jordan get to where he was at by kind of being like, yeah, let me leave room for a discussion about who's the best of all time? Or did you say, no, I'm going to cement this in people's head? That's how I see it for myself. I don't want to give anybody any excuse to say shit. There's still going to be haters. There's still going to be, because capitalism makes people deny Elon Musk, right? That's quite literally it. If you see people are crazy enough to say that Elon Musk is full of shit, and I'm like, dude, shut up. When I was growing up, I'm almost 40 years old. I'm 38 years old. I'm pushing on 39. And I'm like, okay, when I was growing up, I remember hating the fossil fuel industry and blaming the fossil fuel industry for most of our problems and the fact that we were in
good. Jesus Christ.
Industry. It fucking pissed me off. Then all of a sudden, one dude named Elon Musk grabs his fucking balls and he says, you know what? I'm going to address this problem right now. I'm going to address this and I'm going to grab my balls, and he didn't get assassinated. It's the most inspiring story of my fucking lifetime. After he pulls that off, what do you have? Millions of haters, millions of them that want to tear him down. You can't win in this world. So at the end of the day, I'm going to cement my position as well as I can, but I can't convince everybody. But bro, if I can convince 10% of the smartest people on the planet to buy into what we do, then guess what? That changes the entire world. So I don't need to convince everybody. You don't have to convince everybody. And not everybody has to buy into peer review. Not everybody. Is there any peer review data to suggest that a Tesla is better than a traditional car? Is there any peer-reviewed evidence?
I can find them. I guarantee it.
I would imagine you maybe have to go into metrics, but if you went into an internal combustion engine car and then you went into a Tesla, you wouldn't need a scientific study to determine that the Tesla is way fucking better. Until you get into one, you can't know. That's really what it is. And until you get into FB, you can't really know either.
Yeah, actually, pause.
The issue is,
there is, like, they do quality control so that you put a car on the road, right? It's one of the reasons why there's a lot of European cars that are illegal in North America, is because they don't pass the tests. So yes, there are studies that show that. What the fuck? That's funny. All these people debate research. They're making white claims about research that they haven't read. I always use this analogy. It's like me giving a review about the Brothers Karamazov, even though I just looked at the cover. Right? I don't know, but I'm not going to say it's a bad book. Yeah. So much about this. I like how he's really like a fanboy of people who made a lot of money. And the thing I'd say about Elon Musk, I think he gets overhated, but I also think that he gets overloved. Right? There's the electric cars are not that great for the environment. They're better than fossil fuel, but not by that much, because you need to eliminate the battery after. And there's a lot of sources of the battery that are not green yet. Right? So it's like, okay, but you're still using fossil fuel to produce the battery. Right? And you're losing, it's not the most efficient thing to do it, because even in the States, there's a lot of fossil, what is it? Almost like, is it like charcoal? I don't know what it's called. I did a research project on this, but in China, it's a vast amount of the energy is charcoal plants, right? Instead of nuclear. So it's not a perfect solution. And if you look in Canada, Teslas run like shit because they last something like 50% less, because the winters are so hard, because they're basically unusable. You can basically barely go to your we call it like a chalet, but your winter house, right, where you go on weekends. You can barely go because it's so fucking cold. You get there and then you need to recharge your battery, and that's all you can do. You can't really use it. The battery dies really, really early. And then that's bad for the environment as well. I'm not saying Elon Musk is all bad. I'm just saying he's getting overloved. But I don't know. It's very interesting. He's like a big opinion about a lot of things that I don't think he's researched a lot. He said some other things though, right? That were relevant.
I need to go back and listen to it again.
Yeah, go back a little bit.
Hold on.
All of a sudden, one dude named Elon Musk grabs his fucking balls and he says, you know what? I'm going to address this problem. I already will knock it out of the ballpark, but I want to make this so undeniable. Where it's hey, look, bro, if you look at this, it's going to be the equivalent of a person still believing that Santa Claus exists or that unicorns exist, right? If you still believe in that obsolete method, that's how obvious I want to make it. Did Michael Jordan get to where he was at by kind of being like, yeah, let me leave room for a discussion about who's the best of all time? Or did you say, no, I'm going to cement this in people's head? That's how I see it.
Two things.
I don't want to give.
Yeah, so one thing, incredible example using Michael Jordan, the guy who was losing in the playoffs until he started strength training traditionally. What was the name of his coach? Tim Grover?
Yeah.
Very famous for getting Michael Jordan to gain, what is it, 20 pounds of muscle over a summer?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's like a big part of the. And he did the same thing with Kobe. Yeah, it's how he beat the bad boy Piston. So a bad example. He also used Usain Bolt before. Usain Bolt is notorious for lifting in the gym.
And Usain Bolt has like scoliosis.
Yeah. So two examples of like, yeah, just bad examples. Yeah. And what did he say about that? He said some other things. He said, oh, making the results so obvious. It's a very common strategy for conspiracy theorists of always pushing the date further back. So he said recently, or like 2 years ago, oh, the research is coming anytime now. And now today, he says in 5-10 years.
Right.
What do you think in 5-10 years he's going to say? In 5-10 years? Because he's been saying that for 5-10 years. It's like, there's websites online that are just purely conspiracy theory dates that did not fall through. Right. And conspiracy theorists keep believing in it because what's that? I think it's Adam Grant, the guy who's called, where it's like, if you have a strong belief in face of weak evidence, it's not actually, it's fate. It's not knowledge or something like that. This is a good example of this. People are going to keep believing it because he keeps saying it and they want to believe in it. But again, I'm a very big skeptic. If they do the research, all credit goes to you. Good job. We'll see what it means. And again, if FP is shown by great research, which if it goes through, I don't think it's going to be, but if it is, and it shows that it's better than traditional physiotherapy, physiotherapists are just going to learn FP and FP is going to get better. So we'll all clap and be happy. I just don't think it's the case based on like thousands of studies with more participant than functional patterns has ever had. And with control groups, which functional pattern has never had, and with accounting for bias that functional pattern has never done. And then again, it's like more numerous and more high quality research or results, like they say, that's ever been done. So why would we pick yours instead of the scientific establishment? I don't know. That's enough for today.
All right. Cool.
You have anything to add?
No, I think my brain's fried from listening.
Yeah, it's fried as well. Fuck, man. Let me stop there. We're gonna figure out how to edit this.
Yeah, hold on. I gotta. I'm just gonna stop the live stream.
Yeah, sure. The delay and the bug wasn't too bad compared to other stuff we've done before. So we could do live reacts to the Instagram